Again, another horrible ending. Why don't people realize this? You have to plan your ending. Mass Effect and Game of Thrones as games and as the game and as the TV series are perfect examples of how not to do that damn job. Your job is to create the story, bring it to fruition, not throw it away. The game Mass Effect, they basically said it's all a joke, and they all. I mean, you go. In fact, Martin Amis did this in one of his books. Hi, I'm Richard Sparks. I am the author of the New Rock series, the first book, New Rock, New Roll, ROLE. And the second book, New Rock, New Realms, just published. The third one comes out in November, New Rock, New Rules. You can find me at richardsparks.com or richardsparks_author on Instagram. And you are watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by a very talented writer. He is a gamer. He is more than just a gamer. He's a very talented writer. He has created two amazing books, working on his third, the New Rock series. We're joined by the ever-talented Richard Sparks. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Kurt. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure having you. We were talking just briefly earlier. There's stories you can tell, obviously, when it comes to your life and this series, and we're going to dive all into that here today. But for those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking today.
Well, I've been a writer all my life. I started off writing sketches at university at the same time, and one of my performers, I used to perform as a student, but never had any interest in doing it professionally. It was Mel Smith, who went on to not the 9 o'clock news. A couple of years later, I met Rowan Atkinson at the Edinburgh Festival. Rowan, actually in the Oxford group, came to see our show, our two-man show, and we became friends. And I wrote the Schoolmaster sketch for Rowan in 1977, which John Cleese saw in a very little theatre, small show. And he and Martin Lewis, the producer, called Rowan up a year later and asked him to be in what was later called the Secret Policeman's Ball. And that was Rowan's first exposure to a wide public. And he absolutely blew the roof off writing my sketch. I mean, performing my sketch, which I'd already seen him do it half a dozen times at this little show in Hampstead. So I knew how good he was. In fact, the first time I saw him do it in rehearsal, I couldn't believe it. I was going, oh my Lord, this is going to work. You know, in an empty theatre with just me and the director there, watching him fill the room with invisible schoolboys. So I've been lucky enough to work with people as good as that over the years, and I've gone on to be a scriptwriter that's how I made my living, which is actually interesting. When you get to books, you discover that most writers, you have to have second jobs. Most book writers. So I go to all these conventions in the fantasy and science fiction world, and not all of them are full-time writers, and they're really good writers. I've made friends with a lot of them, but it's a much tougher world out there than script writing, where the work comes in, the work goes out, you move on. I'm a gamer. I loved gaming, and when Douglas Adams was actually the first guy who turned me on to gaming, because he was years ahead of his time. He said, "Oh, you've got to try this," and I said, "Douglas, you should be writing your book." Anyway, we all used to tease Douglas because he hated writing, but he was brilliant, of course. So I discovered gaming 20 years ago, I suppose, and then got from one to another. And one day I was galloping around in a PvP game with a bunch of my fellow scoundrels, getting up to trouble. And, one guy was in South Africa. Our group leader was in Southeast United States somewhere. She was a great leader. And I just suddenly thought, what would it really be like to be in a world like this for real, where these games happen, with sword and sorcery involved? And there was only one way to find out, and that was to write it. So the premise is three people, one of them based vaguely on me or my father, as a retired English schoolmaster, living by himself in his retirement bungalow and playing games all day. And he turns out to be really good at it. And he and his two mates, one of whom is an Australian orc, and the other one is an American girl who's a sword dancer. You can vaguely see them on the cover there. They find themselves, after winning the World Championship of Sword and Sorcery in the first chapter of the book, suddenly standing alone on the hillside with crappy swords, and wolves are chasing him, and he doesn't know where the others two are, and it's real. It's not a game. So it's not the going into a game trope that's been done. this idea hasn't. And of course, as soon as I had the idea, I had to work out why and how and what was the reason for this, which came instantly. And then I had the ending of the story, and that sets up the situation for the following stories. So I'm all set up with somewhere to go. I've written four in the series so far. Book three comes out next. This I think it's coming out on Halloween at the World Fantasy Conference in Brighton. And then I got four done, and I'm struggling with book five at the moment. It's kind of weird. I mean, book three was the hardest to write, but looking back, you go, oh yeah, that was easy. But it's my job to do all the work, not the readers. The reader's job is to sit there and just have a good time.
I obviously, the fact that you're going into a 5 book series, if not more, I mean, well, I'm sure you'll have sequels or spin-offs or whatever the case may be. The
That
writing God's willing.
Well, that's it. The writing God's willing. I mean, actually, I was really pleased. I told my agent, look, let's not go to market till I got the first three done, because a single book's no good to a publisher from an unknown writer. I mean, I had a background in writing, and I'd done a lot of things that had been, seen by a lot of people. But as a book writer, I was unknown. So you've got to give them something that is a product, not just a single book. So I wrote the first three. It was on the fourth by the time we went to market, got the publishing deal. And gosh, the moment you get published, everything gets, all sorts of things get in the way of the writing, like going to conferences and dealing with editors. And I'm just about my editor's going to come here next week for the Writers of the Future conference, at which she's a guest speaker in LA, and she's going to stay with me, and we're going to go through the developmental edit of book three, which has now done. And she's brilliant. I love working with her. This is the fun part of the book, is when you finish the first draft and you go, right, now what? And you should dive right in. And she was always showing, like in the first book, she'd say, I love this thing you've got here between this, it was the central character and his magic staff that eventually turns up. And it becomes a symbiotic relationship. She said, that character, that staff, I want more. Dive in. So I went, oh, right, and it becomes a real symbiotic relationship, the two of them sort of teasing each other without using actual words. They know what each other's thinking. And it's lovely when you get an editor who sort of really sets you off to the races. Off you go. That's great.
I have so many questions. Like
Sorry.
no, it's good. This is good. I hear your excitement. I see it in your eyes here. I love this type of aspect when it comes to interviewing creative people like yourself, because you hear and see the passion and what you love doing, and that's great to see here. I'm a big gamer myself. Like I have a group of friends I've been gaming with for decades now, and no matter what the game is, we always gravitate towards something. We all play together in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So finding that community through games and finding the concept and the idea, especially for this new rock series here, it seems to come fairly easy to you in regards to writing this. But has there been any challenges in regards to the writing process?
Always with writing, I've written a lot of lyrics for operas and songs, and for example, a director I worked with said, Richard, you write good lyrics, but you don't know how to think like a lyricist. I said, well, what does that mean? And this is a black belt note, which I got it immediately, but he said, well, a lyricist will take 6 pages of the book, which I happen to have written, but sometimes there's a book writer and a lyricist. So he'll take 6 pages of the book and turn it into 10, 20 lines of a song. And you go, oh, you don't learn that in school. Nobody teaches that. That moves the story 6 pages. So your song's job is to take that 6 pages of narrative and move it in the song, and to distill it and summarize it. That's compressing work, and it's interesting. A book is, my books are 150 to 170,000 words long, and those don't write themselves in the same way as the lyric writes itself. You have to churn out your 500 words a day. Otherwise, it doesn't get done. And one of the things I've particularly learned during this process is the freedom of, oh, I write my 500 words a day. If they're no good, I just chuck them away the next day. And in book three, which is, oh my goodness, going forward through book three, there were so many things that I bumped up against, so many possibilities and challenges and wrong turnings that I made. I mean, looking back now, it all makes sense. but you're groping your way forwards. Nobody's written it yet. You've got this wonderful challenge ahead of you that you've got to try and figure out. I must have thrown away 200 pages in that book, just getting there to that point, going, no, that doesn't work. And there was, I mean, it's interesting the way it's turned out because the first book took 2 months to write. This extraordinary burst of creative energy. The second took 5, the third took a year, the fourth took a year and a quarter, and book 5 is nowhere near finished after a year and a half. But then book 5 is really not exactly a sequel, but the 4 books of the series, the series, and the rest is kind of spin-off sequels, same characters, moving on, same world, just more opportunities to write things. But the story completes at the end of book 4 in a way that is nice, and so I'm really pleased that I could actually retire now, knowing that the job is done. But I love writing so much. I would really like to be able to continue doing this. And one of the ideas I've got is to do spin-off short stories involving 2 of the characters from the world they find themselves in, who are a couple of right little scoundrels who are always getting into trouble. And that could be really good fun to write stories that are the length of one of my chapters, 10 to 15 page short stories that just hold everything together in the short story. But then I'm going to have to learn how to write short stories if I'm going to do that, which is, it's it's a possibility. I would love to be able to do that.
I think it comes down to the writing concept of there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it just depends on how many pages you want to write, right?
Well, yes. I mean, a short story doesn't really have so much in that. I mean, you could always break it down and say there was a 3-act structure in a short story, but actually, it's really more one event that they're doing. Like the amount of stuff you would get into one chapter, but that event itself can be a whole, like a short film, which is completes the story rather than leads on to the next bit. So we shall see. But I'm just very lucky to have found this world that, you know, in my younger days, I tried to write books before and they weren't good enough. I mean, I would send them off to my agent. They'd say, well, this is fine. But in my opinion, looking back, just I hadn't found my groove. This wasn't it. And I'm really glad they weren't published. Although at the time, of course, you're disappointed. You think, what's wrong with these foolish people? But it's once you've got an actual thing that is actually you, that is nobody else. You go, wow, it's I haven't failed to come up with my bliss. And now it's just a matter of months and years of agony ahead of me with the next one.
Well, you wouldn't be on book 5 if you didn't enjoy what you're doing. Obviously, as you said here, I am curious about the writing process, though. I'm not a writer myself, but I know I've had amazing authors like yourself on the show here. What 20% of your writing process do you think delivers 80% of the results?
I do believe in inspiration. Genuinely, I do. And inspiration is a word that, if you break it down into its Latin root, it's not breathing in, which, expiration, you expire and you die. Inspiration is one form of, but what it means in terms of writing is in to. So the God is breathing into your ear. It's coming from outside. And that inspiration is an external thing that comes into your internalness and creates the spark, if you like, that that engenders the work. What Matthew Arnold, the poet, called the spark from heaven. Which I always used to think that's not nonsense. If you're going to write, sit down and write. Why wait for a spark from heaven to fall? But that spark from heaven is the thing that just engenders life. So for me, the moment of inspiration that you get, where that chapter, that is going to be a great scene. And there's a scene in book 3 that when I had the idea for it, I'm just going to do this now. And I must have written it 10 chapters ahead of the point where it arrived. So by the time I got there, I had a complete first draft of an entire chapter just waiting for me. And then it's a matter of sewing it together and going back and make sure the setup is right. Because all construction is set up and payoff. And a perfect example of how not to do it is the Game of Thrones series. Now, I'm a huge George Martin fan. His writing is brilliant. His plot, his story structure is brilliant. What they didn't do in the TV series was set up the ending that they paid off with. It made no sense. The guy suddenly, the girl that you've been rooting for 10 series goes mad, and has a dragon kill people just so that there could be a? I mean, I'm just sitting there watching, going, no. And so all the rest of us out here go, we don't believe it, even if we don't know. As a long-time script editor, I was able to talk to my friends afterwards and say, how could they? Why didn't somebody spot this? And it's just out of nowhere. So set up and payoff are very, very important. If you don't set it up, you can't pay it off. But what you can do, if what I was lucky to discover is because I got 3 books done, really kind of 4 books done before we were published, I'm able to set things up in book 1 and book 2 that you won't even see coming. And then book 3, you go, oh yeah, oh that, so it sort of links through in the story as the different stories and adventures unfold.
Seeing as you're a longtime reader, and I'm looking at your bookshelf behind you there as well too. I love this here. Do you have 3 books, either fiction or nonfiction, that have had the greatest impact on yourself as a writer?
Oh no, I've got millions. Just like a couple of years ago, what was that first chapter in Bleak House where the fog is rubbing its yellow back against the window pane? This is in London. I thought, what was that fog bit? So I picked up Bleak House. And the next thing I knew, I'd finished the book because Dickens is that good. I don't read Dickens anymore, or haven't recently, but books like his works or Trollope or Anthony Powell, for example, The Dance to the Music of Time. My father, who was also an English scholar at Oxford, said, don't read this series until you're over 50. So I left it. And when I was over 50, I read The Dance to the Music of Time. And it was perfect. Like in operas or music, I start off as a rock and roller and listening to Pink Floyd or whatever. Now I'm a Wagner freak. So, Wagner is waiting for everyone at the end. If you'll just keep your eyes and ears open, by the time you're grown up, Wagner is astonishing. I mean, just, yeah. If I'm not wasting time on YouTube or not writing, I might just pop on there and watch a Wagner overture every couple of months just to, and you go, good Lord, there's some talented people in this world. So 3 books that I would, well, you want some titles? Well, I would definitely I think the Lord of the Rings series has to be in there because that was seminal when I was growing up. And I read a recent article about 2 girls who wrote to Tolkien in the middle of the war and said, we love The Hobbit. When's the next book's coming out? And he wrote back and he said, well, I can't really say much about it except it's about Bilbo's nephew Frodo and Bilbo's ring. And I haven't been able to write a single word this year because I've been busy doing other things. And I went, good Lord, if Tolkien takes a year off, because I mean, and you read his book and it flows effortlessly. So you see the things that other writers go through in order to get the work done. Whereas someone like Trollope would write 2,000 words a day before going off to work in the post office. And I believe twice in his life, he finished 1 book, hadn't done all his 2,000 words, so just simply started another one. I take the afternoon off when I finish a book. So I would give Lord of the Rings, fantasy, God. I mean, there are so many other things to read apart from just fantasy, which I love. So my moods at the moment are very much fantasy and science fiction and related to what I'm writing. But I also like to back off and listen to books that aren't fiction. I've just listened to a wonderful book called Fluke by Brian Klaas, which is all about how the world is, how we and chance and read it anyway. It's delightful. So 3 other great books. Well, I suppose I'm going to put Fluke in there now, but because I just finished that yesterday. And what else? I can't really do another fantasy book. That would be unfair. Hmm. I think possibly The Magic Pudding by Norman Lindsay, a book that's 100 years old that I loved as a kid. And Norman Lindsay was an Australian artist and writer, wrote wonderful, funny poems in the book, which is great. Or anything by P.G. Wodehouse. I mean, it just depends on mood, doesn't it? And P.G. Wodehouse is just the, the risks he take are just so effortless. I mean, one book I was listening to recently, he talked about I wouldn't telephone someone with a barge pole. You go, only Woodhouse could could mangle that wouldn't touch him with a barge pole. But I mean, it's just effortless for him.
You talked about music and writing, and obviously your influences have changed over the years, especially in your not only in your career but in your personal life. When you're writing, what music is synonymous with your creative process?
Ooh, synonymous. Well, it would have to be uh, operatic or symphonic music, which again is not something I listen to very much. I'm more of a rock and roller. I love bluegrass. There's my banjo, you know. So, but symphonies are constructed, and now that I'm writing books, you learn that the construction of books is astonishingly important. This is why a lot of literary fiction bothers me, because it's not their priority is to create a structured story the same way as it is for other writers like science fiction writers or writers of genre fiction. If you don't put the story together, you're going to lose the audience. And often in literary fiction, that's not a priority. And that's another thing in Brian Clouse's book, Fluke, about, we need our stories to make sense because life doesn't make sense. Uh, life isn't a story, and they all lived happily ever after is not really an ending, it's a cop out, but that's the way we like it. We construct stories around whatever we see. He gives the example from one psychiatrist who gave a 6-word story: a tiger, a hunter, a tiger. We make a story out of that. Is it the same tiger at the end? I don't know. Does the tiger eat the hunter? Does the hunter shoot the tiger? Does another tiger come along? But we naturally try and make sense out of everything because that's the only way, that's how we survived as human beings before we had comfortable houses and fireplaces and an old dog on the floor. Look at him, sweetheart.
You mentioned Douglas Adams
Yeah.
and games in our green room session here. What was the game that he got you into, or like what was that friendship or at least meeting like when it came to your introduction to video games or games in general?
Well, the friendship goes back to university. He was at Cambridge, same time I was at Oxford. So we were both doing funny shows in the Edinburgh Festival at the same time. And his team had Simon Jones in it, who was the original Arthur Dent in the radio show of Hitchhiker, Jeff McGibbon, who was in that. Our team had Mel Smith in it, who went on to become a big TV comedy star, and was also in The Princess Bride, playing the man with albinism. Lovely friend of mine. So Douglas and I just met. We both had the same agent. It's a very small literary agency in London, and she tried to get us to work together. I mean, paid work, but we tried very hard, but didn't come up with anything that actually fruitioned. But he's just great fun to hang with. Um, can't remember the specific game he was talking about because by the time he was mentioning games to me, he was off to the races with them. He disappeared so far down that rabbit hole, and he didn't make it to the 21st century, so the games were pretty crude. So years later, typical, Douglas well ahead of his time, I stumbled across gaming, and one thing led to another, as you know it can. When you find a game that just eats you alive, there's just nothing like it. And funnily enough, I've now come out of the other end of that. Just as I'm back in the 2005, 7, 10 period, I got into writing books about poker and playing poker online, and wrote 2 books about the World Series of Poker. Played a lot, and because then I sort of came out of the other end of it. So poker is less of an interest to me. I mean, I enjoy watching people play, but playing myself now is not something that I'm really have to do, or I don't have to do gaming, because what I have to do is write my books. And when that dries up, I hope it doesn't, I'll wonder what else I have to do.
Because you put yourself into gaming, into poker, into your work as heavily as you do, does creative burnout happen for you?
Yes, yeah, it does. These books, I honestly had thought that I'd tried and failed at writing fiction. I've got about a dozen, probably about 6 books in the bottom drawer that didn't make it to the light of day. Some were written back in my 20s. One of which was good, and there's a producer here in town who really loves it. So every time we meet, he said, "What happened to that one?" And that would be a sort of young adults story based on a Nepalese legend My father was a Gurkha officer in the Second World War. He wasn't a professional soldier, but he was 6 years an officer. So, um, and he got to know the Gurkhas very well and spoke Nepali, various branches of it. And so he told me this myth, and I thought that'd make a great story. So that was probably the nearest, the one that I thought, oh, well, that deserved to see the light of day. But the others were basically just learning the craft. And then when I had the idea for New Rock, New Roll, it was just years since I'd written or attempted to write a book, and it just opened up. And that's kind of a relief because I'd sort of parked it. I said, okay, I've had a decent career as a script writer, as a writer of opera, libretti, as a, as director and lyricist, and I've made a living doing it, which is unusual. And so maybe book writing isn't my thing, even though I'd written some narrative non-fiction books. And then this thing fell out of the sky. And so I finished the first draft and sent it off to my agent. And as always, it takes an agent a couple of months to get around to reading something. I just wanted to know what happened next. So when she called up and said, this is exactly what people want, it's escapism, it's fun, it's light, it's adventure, if things go terribly wrong, it's a serious adventure with high stakes, but there's comic touches. She said, this is just what people want. And I said, oh, well, that's nice because I'm, well into the sequel. And she said, oh, right, 3-book deal. Oh, 3 now, is it? So that's the way it rolls on. And I realized that this is expanding from book to book to book. And so, of course, you get to the end of one bit and you go back and plot the beginning of it and plan and plot and weave it all together so that the books all fit together. But it's been a huge relief, actually, to write something that I'm confident is good, because I wouldn't want anything. If book 5 isn't as good as books 1, 2, 3, and 4, it's not going to see the light of day. If I can't get it up to that standard, I'm not interested in just pot boilering for the sake of it. It's got to fruition. It's got to come to fruition. It's got to deliver and deliver in really in emotional terms for the reader and for me. So we'll see. Who knows? You just
What was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
oh wow. Oh, well, early. Well, oh man, I just always loved books ever since the very beginning. In fact, my mum still has a letter I wrote to Bodley Head, the publishers of some of the Narnia books. Dear Boldy Head, it starts B-O-L-D. I must have been about 6 or 7. I want to write books. How do I do it? I don't know what I wrote in it. Uh, so all those wonderful word games you get in books, like the Magic Pudding, which I mentioned, it's got lovely, funny poems. I mean, it's the story of a wombat, a koala bear who goes off on adventures in Australia, and he meets a sailor and a penguin, and they have a magic pudding. And this magic pudding is a snotty little beast who's always getting up on its legs and running away. But you just whistle, turn it round twice, and cut another slice, and it's a different flavour. And this pudding has a lovely poem. Once he goes, well, he's just moaning. He goes, "Oh, who would be a pudding in a pot, a pudding that is stood in a fire that is hot? Oh, sad indeed the lot of puddings in a pot. I wouldn't be a pudding if I could be a bird. If I could be a wooden doll, I wouldn't say a word. Yes, I've often heard it's grand to be a bird, but as I am a pudding in a pot. I hope you get the stomach ache, you pudding eating lot." That's more or less right. I just loved all that as a kid, lapped it up. So yeah, that sort of yeah. I owe so much to books and stories that I hardly know where to start.
Do you think that with the advent of audio plays and dramas and things that we can now listen to, the art of reading may become a lost art?
No, I myself listen to books more than I read them. I go for a walk every day and I listen to a book on tape, and I have some favorites that I keep going back to say just when there's a really good reader or a good writer, someone like P.G. Woodhouse. If I've done something that's quite demanding or serious or thought fulfilling, then I go to him. Or Stephen Fry reads beautifully. His series of books about Greek myths and Greek history is extremely well done. Um, so, well, I try all sorts of things. What was was that the question? I think I went off on a tangent.
No, no, I was just curious of the art of reading, especially with the massive digital consumption these days, just seems to
Yeah.
be.
Well, a lot of people aren't reading, and kids, I was at the World Conference, the fancy conference, Worldcon last summer in Scotland, and there's a kid sitting next to me, the entire um, panel was just on his phone like this, flicking, just never looked up once. Right next to me, there's people on stage talking, and they were very interesting. And I was thinking, well, what are you doing here? I mean, a lot of people in the fantasy world, as you know, are neurodiverse, so he may have been, he may have been autistic or on the spectrum. So it's not up to me to pry, but I just thought this is so sad. This is this the world out there, and yet you're locked into this telephone getting 5 second hits of something. It's very odd. And Martin Amis, who was a friend of mine, he was at my college at Oxford at the same time as a couple of years ahead of me, but we met doing classes together. He thought the long read was over. Um, I'm not sure that I agree because certainly in science fiction and fantasy, we do still create and consume the long read. The series is like Martin's Game of Thrones series or Song of Ice and Fire series. Those are sizable books. Extraordinary. And I love it because he's kind of, in a way, he's my step writing partner because I write lyrics and operas. We've written about a dozen operas now with Lee Holdridge, the composer, and Lee's wonderful melodist. And Lee was the composer on Beauty and the Beast, which George Martin was one of the two writers on, along with Ron Koslow. So in a way, George, he would produce these wonderful scripts, as would Ron, and then Lee would put music to them. And yeah, so I've decided that he's my writing partner really, with Lee in the middle. Well, she's so good, George Martin. But those are long books, and there's a big demand for them still. And look at the rise of romanticy. There's sizable books that people write, and people love reading. It's a totally different experience from watching a play, or which I also love. So try and do everything. To lock yourself into a telephone seems to me to be giving up a large uh, portion of what is available to you. And I don't quite understand why people spend so much time on their phones. And I've looked at them, there's not much in there.
Well, you take apart one, and then there's a lot of things that you just have to put it back together. But I think the creative outlet a lot of people have these days are it's different from generation to generation. I can understand that the fact that video games is kind of that common factor, and the fact that you're taking a wonderful series, and you created a wonderful series, I should say, using video games as the base, I think is wonderful to see. When it comes to maybe putting limitations on yourself from a creative perspective, have you ever done that where you've, say, limited your word count, or you've writing during a specific time of day? Is there something that where you wanted to just push your creativity, or is it a concept of whenever you feel the need to be creative, you just be creative?
If you get the need to be creative, you should always just go with it. You always have a notebook by the bedside in case you wake up and scribble something down, because it's gone in the morning if you don't. That's really annoying, waking up saying, "What's that great idea that I had?" I had an idea for a chapter title for the next book, and I dictated it into my phone, chapter X, just 3 words. And like 5 minutes later, I couldn't remember it because I was off for a walk, and I was so I got, oh, I got it. Oh yeah, of course, that's it's safe. So you have to be prepared to write at any time. I write at night. My wife goes to bed early. She's what's it, early bird, and I'm a night owl. So she will go to bed early after we've done dinner together, and I will sit down and write. And I get a beer going, or occasionally three, and just write. Let the inspiration flow. And then when I wake up the next morning, I do the cleaning up and the editing. But if I got a book back, to a draft back from my editor, that's an all day job. Just dive in, because then you've already got the draft. It's when you don't have the draft, when you're going ahead, you know where you're going to some extent, but not in detail. I don't know what I'm going to write tonight. I know where I am in the book, But and I know where I will be eventually, but how I get there is going to be revealing itself as you go along. It's fly by the seat of your pants as well as do your pull focus, get right above it, look down at everything, see what there is there, do your outline. I do my outlines as I go along. I get another file with writing the outlines, and there's in the book 5 at the moment. There's I don't know what 18 chapters done, several ideas in the outline, and some blank spaces, and then there's an ending, which I've got. You have to work out your ending first, otherwise you're in you don't know where you're aiming. I mean, you're in the same position as the reader. I mean, that's no good. You can't just grope along and hope to find an ending in the mix, as we say in film. You can't just find you keep shooting and then you'll make an ending in the edit. Nope, you got to plan it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm in the TV and film industry as a DIT, so I handle all the footage and stuff. So, you go on sets and it's going to be a good set when they have a shot list and a book and conversations and communication
Oh
among
yeah.
people. Like, as long as you have that end goal, that end plan, then you're ultimately going to succeed. Unless you decide to waste 3 months and it's not your money.
No, you've got to. It's so. Two things any director can do is prepare and run a happy ship. And part of the preparation is getting the script right. And part of getting the script right is working out your ending. Here's the what if. Where does it land? It's got to be about the first thing you think of. Apart from, God, this is a great idea. Wow, it's going to have these characters in it. It's going to be set in Zimbabwe in the year 4012, and it's going, whatever you got, there's your idea. But where does it end? Where does it land? What's the summary? And once you got that, then you can go the long way around. You can put in your um, red herrings and your tricks, and you lead the audience up the garden path, and they think they know, and they get to that point, and then they go, oh yeah, right. I see. Now you got me. And audiences love that when they say, "Oh, that's the answer." Of course, yeah. Look at any decent detective story. There are all these things where in the audience, you're groping along trying to figure out who done it, which is delightful and great. But if the creators don't know who done it, well, good luck to them. You're probably just not going to get there by chance.
What's the most surprising or counterintuitive lesson you've learned from gaming as an older adult that you wish you had known earlier in life?
It's a really simple one. I know it doesn't sound it, but listen, it's if you're reading a book or listening to an epic poem, whatever it is, watching a film, watching a play, you're the audience and someone else is doing that. Whatever it is, play, book, film, epic poem. In a game, you're the hero of your own story. It's so different that just that one leap where you with your mouse, your keyboard, or that's what I use, other people use Xboxes and so on, you are deciding where your character goes and what your character does. And some of the best games that we've had over the last 15, 20 years have been sandbox games. Sorry, sandbox games. They are my own teeth, really. And in a sandbox game, you can just go anywhere. You can avoid. I was recently playing Skyrim again for the first time. I mean, what a great game that is. And if you just don't do the main quest, you can wander around doing all sorts of other things without having dragons turning up and being annoying and getting in the way, which is amazing. So you just take a whole different way of looking around, and then they're very fulfilling. You know, I mean, one of the things I think a lot of people like about them is they can build a wonderful house in these games where they might be living in a fairly small, pokey one-bedroom apartment. And here, beyond their computer, they got a home that really feels like a proper home to them. So there's that, as well as the fact that it's you as the hero of your own story, uh, which is really a step beyond narrative or dramatic fiction, where you're just the audience.
Do you have like three games or whatever that you just kind of you've either picked up recently or you've played in the past that you just go back to?
I don't really play anymore because I'm so busy I suppose you could say writing my own game, but it's not a game. It's inspired by games like Skyrim. It was actually while playing Elder Scrolls Online that I got the idea, while galloping around with my friends, my teammates in my ears, all giggling and being silly. It was a very funny groups we used to have. And when I got the idea for what would this really, if I was really in real life doing this, and of course you'd be hopeless. We were a top level crew. So I had this idea that, okay, these three people, a mage, an orc warrior, and a girl DPS, damage per second, sword dancer. She's the Asian American girl. The three of them, win the world championship. Well, the next thing he's alone on a hillside, of course, he'd be terrible. I've never picked up a sword in real life. And there isn't a magic staff around, obviously, because is there magic in this world? Well, spoiler alert, you know, 200 or 300 pages later, it all comes together and things work out. But yeah, you would be useless. So it's a wonderful opportunity to go back to the beginning, to do the whole training. Gets captured and sold into an army and has to learn, and then you do the training sequence, which is always a great part of any game. It's the beginning where you're learning the controls, getting the feel for the world. Uh, so I would definitely put the Elder Scrolls games in there. I don't know if any new ones are coming out or have come out recently because I've been, as I said, uh, otherwise occupied. What other games did I like? I remember in the old days, back in the text games, the Zork universe was a lot of fun, but that was barely computer graphics. I suppose it was by a certain time. So but all the sword and sorcery or Dragon's Age, that was fun, and then that got really it went off the boil. And also, do you remember Mass Effect?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I love a horrible
Massive.
ending for number
Oh,
three.
again, another horrible ending. Why don't people realize this? You have to plan your ending. Mass Effect and Game of Thrones as games and as the game and as the TV series are perfect examples of how not to do that damn job. Your job is to create a story, bring it to fruition, not throw it away. The game Mass Effect, they basically said it's all a joke, didn't they? I mean, you go. In fact, Martin Amis did this in one of his books, which was his second book. Martin used to share a house in Oxford, Shilton in Oxford, outside Oxford town, city, with my friend Paul Roberts. We were all in the same college and they were 2 years ahead of me. So Paul became my great mate because he dropped out for a year anyway and got married. So Paul called me up and said, Martin's written another book. And we were all really proud of Martin. He got his first book published aged like 25 or something. We go, bloody hell. This, the first book, the Rachel papers. The second book was called in England Dead Babies. I think it had a different title in America because that was seen as being not very nice. So Paul called me up and said, Martin's written another book. I'm in it, and he's called me Quentin. So Martin obviously based the character on Paul's character in the house they all shared together. Well, Paul didn't seem to mind that he turned out to be completely out of nowhere. This character turned out to be a wild-eyed, axe-wielding maniac who kills everyone. And again, a terrible ending that came out of absolutely nowhere. Martin didn't do the plotting at all. But he was pissed off that he was called Quentin, which he thought was a silly name. Didn't mind being an axe murderer. But that's a perfect example of Martin not really giving a stuff about story structure because he's doing other things. And some of the other things Martin does are beyond brilliant. I mean, he can write a paragraph like absolutely nobody. And is, just a great, great writer. But plotting, nah. I mean, look at what was the book with John Self in it? Not London Fields. Oh, I can't remember. Anyway, it's about the character that they go off to court in Hollywood as a big producer just turns out to be a fraud. And he just throws this away at the end of the book, and you go, I've followed you all through this book. You can't just tell me it's all a fake. So that's why that's a difference. Martin's sadly not with us anymore, but I'm sure we could sit around and have a beer and a chat about how important story structure is. It's obviously not important to him and to other literary writers as it is to those of us who, just really think the story is central to mainly popular fiction like science fiction and fantasy. Without a story, it fails, it dies.
Everyone has one person that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you? 'Cause
Yeah, I think it's my worst enemy at school, actually. He was a complete, he was just a horrible guy. And he was very, very intelligent. He was in the same house at the boarding school as I was. And sort of kind of my year, got there ahead of me, but was in different streams because people didn't realize how brilliant he was. He got a top scholarship to Oxford eventually. And when I met him as an adult, he was just the nicest person in the world. It was just great. But he just inspired me to be funny or to write funny because he was just so sharp. And just where does all this come from? As a child, I was thinking, that's what I want to do. I would go and see a Marx Brothers film or something. How do they do that? And eventually realized that this is people. People make things up. J.K. Rowling said, Rowling, she said that when she realized that books were written and not hadn't just appeared and always been there, she said that's what I want to do. And I think I sympathise with that. Um, this this person who was not very nice as a teenager turned out to be delightful as a student at university. Just inspired me to, that's what I want to do. That I want to be able to write funny. I want to say funny things. I want that level of wit. And so I think that really inspired me. Of course it didn't come easy. You didn't, it just grows.
From a professional standpoint, you are a successful writer with many books under your belt and many more to come, I'm sure. And I can't wait to read your entire series. I will be first in line digitally to pick those up for sure. So, from a professional standpoint, you are successful. Do you consider yourself personally successful?
Well, obviously yes and no, because no human being is um, anything near perfect. Another thread of Brian Classe's book. I'm pinching all his ideas now. But yes, I've been blessed. I've got a lovely wife. We've been married for 40 years, 41 years. We have a lovely daughter. We have a house and we have savings. So we're in the position now in the twilight years of our life to say, well, we're okay, and what can we do for other people? I think that's something that we've um, put in motion recently. Yeah, I do think I think luck plays so much of a part in it. And again, please read Brian Glass's book. Oh God, and the amount of he's going to owe me for all these plugs. But luck, it plays a big part, and what luck is endlessly debatable. But I'm very well aware that I've been able to do what I want in my life, which is right. I only had to have a job for 2 years working in television as a in a an office job doing continuity and making trailers. And after that, I just thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to sink or swim. So I got out of that. So I've been able to pursue my passion, and it's always been uh, as evasive as it is successful. I've had a bottom drawer full of projects that haven't happened, and then some of them, they revive years later and they go off and get done, and you move on. So I'm definitely grateful for the luck that I've had. As to being successful, well, some hits, some misses.
The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
It's your best teacher. Absolutely. Failure teaches you. Success doesn't really teach you anything. You just think, oh, yeah, I deserve that. And I've seen people do this in acting. They get success early and they think they deserve it and they become a-holes, which is rather sad because, yeah, people like me who are behind the camera who are of no importance to the audience, they don't care about us. We're just part of the team. We hear all the stories. We know which actors just you don't want to work with. You hear about them, you go, oh God, no, not that. No, we won't have her. She's got the mother from hell, or oh God, her sister's always coming on the set and interfering. And you go, really? Well, why are they like that? It's a, just it really is a good idea not to be an asshole in this business because you've got to get on with other people. And a lot of the people who are difficult do it out of a sense of insecurity. And they haven't quite got their head around the idea that um, they need to behave. I mean, look at this big spat that's been going on between, is it Blake Lively and Jason somebody or other, which has been all over the papers. And you go, wow, that sounds like a poisonous set to be on. How difficult. And can't you just run a happy ship?
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way as a writer, or maybe in some other creative space. You've inspired them down that path. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
Simple old pay it forward idea. Give to the next lot down. Writing is all about giving, and you know, like you give acting, you give a performance, you give a speech. A book is, you have to pull it out of your own intestines and give it. If you didn't want to do that or feel the need to do that, you certainly wouldn't, because it is demanding. It's incredibly rewarding. I would say to anyone, look, I get asked two things by young people. One is, should I go to Hollywood? I live in California now. Should I go to Hollywood and try and become an actor? And I say every time, absolutely, yes, give it a go. You don't want to be 80 and looking back and thinking, I could have been a contender. Give it a go. Come and try. And then you can make films on your own iPhone now. You can do small productions, and many, many, many talented people are not now having to jump through the hoops of needing vast amounts of money. Just get out there and do it and make the most of it. And yeah. And the other one I get is, should I become a professional poker player? And the answer to that is absolutely not, because poker players are by nature predators. I love the game. I play it as what we call a rec player, recreational. I'm not even a regular, but for me, it's just interesting. I go and play. Of course, I try and win, and if you play well, you do, and if you play well and get unlucky, you don't. But you don't want to spend your life pillaging other people, and especially, you win money, you don't pay your taxes, you get in a cheating ring in order to pay your debts. It's a tough, tough world, and it's you against the rest of the world. I don't think that's a healthy way to live. Even though you are, you're independent and you're not stuck in an office job, so the freedom is appealing, but I think the downsides are quite serious.
If your life was a book, what would its title be? And and what would its soundtrack be?
Well, the title would be From Wallyhood to Hollywood, because I planned that for my autobiography years ago, which I'm never going to write, I don't think, because I'd much rather make stuff up for my heroes. But as I ended up over here in LA doing a lot of work here, that seemed to me a good summary of the arc of my life. Do you have the expression "someone's a complete wally"? Does that work in Canada?
No, but I'll make sure I tell everyone now.
Well, in England, a wally is a complete idiot. So, From Wallyhood to Hollywood would be the title of my book. Foggy Mountain Breakdown by Earl Scruggs. That's all you need. 2.5 minutes of bliss. Just look at that moment in Bonnie and Clyde, where they take off after the bank, and Earl rips into Foggy Mountain Breakdown. 2.5 minutes of pleasure. And that was the 1949 recording. They couldn't find a better version. And that was actually Warren Beatty told Arthur Penn, the director, this is the music you need. And when he heard it, he went, yes, sir. So yeah, that would the soundtrack of my life, Foggy Mountain Breakdown. I'll take that.
Well, Richard, I do hate to say it, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Kurt. And enjoy the books. Do you want me to tell you where to get them? Was that part of the thing?
Yes, that's what I was. My follow-up question is, where can we find those books, and how can we support you in your wonderful endeavor?
Well, the books are on Amazon.com or .co.uk, and on Barnes and Noble and other bookstores. If you want to find out more about them, you can get free samples at my website, richardsparks.com. There's no E in Sparks. There's a free sample of each book and a free audio sample of each book. So that's 4 chapters up there already, and there'll be more for the next books. I'm on Instagram as well, and what's it called, Facebook, which I don't actually do, but my assistant, my scribe goblin, she will hoover those up and send them on to me. So I'm easily findable, and I hope you enjoy the books. I just want to give people a good time.
Thanks again for being on the show. I greatly appreciate that. You can, of course, find this interview and 1,200 plus others on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast you can find at Two Geeks Talking, that's TWO twogeekstalking.podbean.com, or just search Two Geeks Talking wherever you get your podcasts. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.